Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, reporting Gaza, the Israeli blockade, and the media.
We're not being allowed into the Gaza Strip to report on those things.
The Zimbabwean cameraman and his award-winning work. Rupert Murdoch's empire facing the media challenges of the Obama era.
You YouTubers have been ripping us off, taking tens of thousands of our videos and putting them up on YouTube.
Monty Python version 2.0 on YouTube.
Really? Wow. Fabulous. Great idea.
Welcome back. Depending on where you're standing, the word blackout can have different meanings. In Gaza, where there's no power for up to 20 hours a day and widespread shortages of kerosene and gas, the term is taken quite literally. However, the Israeli blockade of the Palestinian territories has now been extended to the media, creating a news blackout that is severely restricting the reporting of the suffering in Gaza to the outside world. In a letter to the Israeli Prime Minister, Western news organizations, including the Associated Press, Reuters, CNN, and the BBC, all called for access to Gaza to be restored immediately. Israel denies the policy is aimed at the media and says the blackout has to do with its security concerns rather than the controlling of information. That's our starting point this week. Gaza, the blackout, and the growing fear that a new attack by Israel could be carried out without the world being able to see what's going on. The Gaza Strip, a territory under one form of Israeli occupation or another for more than 4 decades. For Gaza's 1.5 million Palestinians, many now reliant on aid from the United Nations to survive, theirs is a story that is not being told.
The main thing that has changed in the past nearly 3 weeks is that Israel is refusing to allow foreign journalists, international journalists, to cross from Israel into Gaza. And this is quite new and quite troubling.
It's particularly worrying now and really disgraceful that the media hasn't made more of this media blackout.
There has been no shortage of reports on Arabic language media on the blockade. However, their focus has been mainly on the humanitarian side of the story.
The large jail holding Gaza and its people prisoner warns of a certain humanitarian crisis.
International English language news channels like CNN and BBC cannot get their correspondents into Gaza to report on what is happening.
And so the answer is no, we won't be getting into the Gaza Strip again today.
As a result, Shireen Tadros and Ayman Mohyeldin of Al Jazeera English virtually have the English language broadcast version of this story to themselves,
leaving them and international organizations wondering how long they have until the Israeli military decides to open Gaza's crossings once again. Ayman Mohyeldin, Al Jazeera, Gaza.
Major international newspapers are also trapped on the outside looking in. They depend on news agencies like Reuters and the Associated Press for coverage. And those agencies are unable to bring in extra journalists to beef up their presence in Gaza, the way they normally would for a big story.
Gaza is being covered for us, as it always is, by our bureau, which is largely staffed by Palestinians. I, for example, would normally go to Gaza every so often, every week or two, and some of my international colleagues would go, and we haven't been able to do that.
By being here on the ground, you get something more than what you just simply see in terms of the pictures and in terms of the statements that are released through news agencies and others. There's something about being here on the ground and feeling it that will actually reflect in the coverage that many journalists produce out of here.
On occasion, the Israeli government has been called out on its new media policy, in this case by the American network ABC.
This time, Israel has even barred the world's press from getting in.
This has nothing to do with preventing access. This has everything to do with the security situation on the ground and our need to take care of the lives of Israeli citizens.
But there has not been a lot of that. Israel argues the blockade is in place to prevent Palestinian rocket attacks on Israel. But the Israelis have blockaded Gaza before and let journalists in. This time, it's different.
The Israeli government has clearly decided that this is a specific policy of preventing international journalists from crossing their border with the Gaza Strip, and I think that is very hard to explain.
There's definitely a component to the story that perhaps the Israeli government doesn't want to get out. To be here on the ground to see what is happening to the 1.5 million people as a direct result of Israeli policies, it's imperative for journalists to actually be able to see that.
The media have put up with it for so long that it's ceased to be news. The Israeli restrictions have ceased to be news, and unfortunately it's the Palestinians that are losing.
But why have the media not made more of that aspect of this story, since it directly affects their ability to do their jobs?
This is as far as we're allowed to go.
It is much easier, for instance, when there is a media blockade by Zimbabwe, to make a fuss about that and not have any reprisals from any lobbies or officials. Whereas when you're talking about Israel, I mean, a journalist is really sticking their neck out much more.
I think indeed one should question the Israeli purpose behind it. Maybe these journalists who are barred from entering should press more, not for their right to enter, but question more in Israel and Israeli politicians why the whole siege is so tight these last weeks.
There is one other aspect to this story Israel cannot be directly blamed for. Gaza is dangerous. When the BBC's Alan Johnston was kidnapped last year by Palestinians, the BBC announced it would no longer base a correspondent there. That leaves the BBC, like other news organizations, at the mercy of the Israelis when they want to get in. 41 years into the occupation, and after 41 years of news coverage, the Gaza story has never been harder for the media to tell. This really is a case of no news being good news for Israel and bad news for Palestinians.
It's people here reporting on what is happening and the policies of the Israeli government towards the Palestinian people, and I think that's been a real shame for foreign news organizations.
Until the media stands up and says enough is enough, you have to loosen these restrictions, then Israel has no reason to do so. These are human beings who are suffering, and their stories should be heard.
Here's how our Global Village voices see the news blockade of Gaza.
The reason why Israel is blocking journalists from entering Gaza is because the Israeli government does not want people to know the truth about what's happening in Gaza, the humanitarian disaster that's happening to the Gazan population, and the role of the mainstream media should be to ensure that people know the truth.
Barring journalists from entering Gaza is just one of the many instances in which Israel cuts off freedom of the press to keep its human rights abuses out of the public eye. Israel broke the ceasefire in Gaza, it intensified the siege, and like a third-rate despotic regime, it continues to make a mockery of the Fourth Geneva Convention. This press restriction flies in the face of democracy and reaffirms that Israel, as an occupying force, continues to control the Gaza Strip and also collectively punishes 1.5 million people.
If you have issues with the global media and the way they report the news, email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net and we'll find a way to get your comments on the air as one of our Global Village voices. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Staying with the Palestine-Israel story for a moment. The Palestinian Authority has taken the unusual step of making a direct appeal through a newspaper advertisement to the Israeli people for peace. They did it through some of Israel's leading newspapers. The ad attempts to resuscitate a Saudi-backed peace plan that was proposed back in 2002, which offers Arab recognition of Israel in exchange for an end to Israeli occupation of land captured in the 1967 war. The ad included the full text of the seven-point initiative and was framed by the flags of 50 Arab and Muslim countries. Israeli media described the direct appeal to Israelis over the heads of politicians there as an extraordinary media event. Iranian-Canadian blogger Hussein Derkeshan has been arrested in Iran on charges of spying for Israel. In 2006, Derkeshan made a much-publicized trip to Tel Aviv in what he called an attempt to enhance the understanding between Israelis and Iranians. His trip was filmed and aired in Israel. According to Jahan News, a conservative website considered close to Tehran's intelligence community, Derkeshan is under interrogation and during initial questioning, quote, admitted, unquote, to spying for Israel. That's a grave offense under Iranian law. A new report says that Iran's estimated 21 million internet users are finding more and more websites that they try to access are being blocked. The latest tally of blocked sites has now reached over 5 million. They include political, human rights, and women's rights sites, as well as anything deemed pornographic or anti-Islamic. International news websites like BBC, CNN, and the Associated Press have also been blocked intermittently since the Iranian administration considers them, quote, tools of diplomacy conducted through the media, unquote. Some of the newer additions to the blacklist include two of the most popular sites now on the internet, Facebook and YouTube. The suspicion is that the U.S. government's Arabic language satellite news channel Al Hurra is an expensive propaganda failure. Just how much of a failure, we may never know. Last year, the U.S. government asked the University of Southern California's Center on Public Diplomacy to conduct a study on the channel, its cost to taxpayers, and whether it was worth the money. That report was completed in June, but has yet to be made public. According to ProPublica, an independent American watchdog organization, the U.S. government has rejected a request made under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act to release the study. This much we do know. Since it began broadcasting back in 2004, Al Hurra has cost American taxpayers about $500 million. Zimbabwe has one of the world's most repressive media regimes, so it's difficult to get that story reported both inside the country and out. That's one of the reasons that Zimbabwean cameraman Mike Saburi has won this year's Mo Amin Award for contributions to television news.
It's cameramen like you who bring the news to the world. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Saburi supplied footage of Zimbabwe to news organizations like Reuters, who then passed that video on to their many clients around the world. Some of the footage included shots of then opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai after he was tortured while in police detention. Recently, the Listening Post looked at some of the world's worst media offenders as listed in the annual Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index. On that list of 173 countries, Zimbabwe ranked 151st. After the break, the media mogul and Team Obama. Rupert Murdoch faces a less friendly White House.